going on, Knicks fans? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Cap Rules Everything Around Me. Cream, get the money, dollar bills, y'all. I am your host, Jeremy Cohen. We are less than 20 hours away as things stand from the NBA trade deadline. Very excited for tomorrow. You'll have John and myself doing a live stream from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see if any trades break in between now and then, but as we see how the Knicks move along, they of course made some pretty significant trades at the end of 2023 and much of 2024. So with the restrictions of the CBA, how it's hitting the NBA and the moving pieces the Knicks have, makes a whole lot of sense that they might not be able to go out and do all sorts of different things. Now, usually I like to start off with one big thing. And when we talk about whether it's on Cream or general podcasts on Twitter, whatever it might be, we talk a lot about the business of basketball. We talk about the economics of basketball. I love basketball, the sport, but there are fun, different dimensions that we can go about to discuss something that we all love. And for teams, owners, players, any stakeholders really, basketball at its core is a business, but it's also, from a fan perspective, entertainment. It's escapism, right? When we talk about trades, we talk about it from a fan perspective. When we talk about decisions that a coach should or shouldn't make, we talk about it as fans. When we think through how do we operate, how does a team, right? We even say we because we associate ourselves with a particular team. How do we move in a direction that fits what we want? And it's because we are in a situation in which we have no control. We can only control what's in our control. And the moves made by a team from the top to the bottom are out of our control. And I've been thinking a lot this week in terms of how business, especially with this CBA, has impacted enjoyment for fans. And we've discussed it in the past. It's hard for fans to be able to follow the sport and then have to do math. I don't blame them for not wanting to. I enjoy it. That's not everyone, and that's totally okay. But this whole week, I've been thinking about the most significant trade I've ever seen, which was the Luka Doncic Anthony Davis trade. How it was done in the middle of the night, at least certainly Eastern Standard Time. I was at a party, got a call from a friend who had just left telling me what had happened because I wasn't looking at my phone. Thought he was pulling my leg for a moment. Sure enough, he was telling the truth. And I've just been thinking about how moves get made, why it happens. And this was not necessarily a cost-cutting move, right? There was the $345 million supermax hanging in the balance that Luka Doncic said he was willing to sign. But you're not preempting that sort of thing. If you're making a financial decision about one of the 5 best players in the NBA, then you should not be making that decision. If your decision is also to find a deal that is win now, but doesn't set you up for the best success, short term or long term, you don't have to make that decision. But the thing that I keep going back to is the fandom element, where you see Mavericks fans, how despondent they are because they love their players. And you see teams go generations without a player that is as good as Luka, maybe sometimes even 75% as Luka. And now maybe the Mavericks find a way to add a high impact player before the deadline tomorrow. And maybe this move pays off. And again, business and fandom are 2 separate things. But growing up, I was one of the biggest Yankees fans ever, right? What kid growing up isn't a huge fan of their favorite team? And I was fortunate enough to grow up in an era where Derek Jeter was present as far as I can remember. And I distinctly remember all of the great memories that I have of Derek Jeter as a kid, where I wanted to play shortstop because of Derek Jeter. I watched so many of his plays live, be it on TV or in person. I was at the game where he hit his 3,000th hit. Um, I've seen how he sacrifices his body for the game, how he plays, how he leads, how he conducts himself, how he has modeled himself to reflect the city in which he supports. Because at the end of the day, these players, they're just people. They wear laundry, but it means something to us. And I know that when Derek Jeter retired, he retired when I was in college, and it felt like a core piece of myself was graduating. This was a new chapter for me. What was this sport going to be like without Derek Jeter, without my favorite player? And we're going to see that in enough seasons, probably with LeBron James as well. Love him or hate him, he has meant so much to this franchise, or excuse me, to this league. But I just kept thinking about how fortunate I feel that I'll get to tell my kids that I got to see Derek Jeter play, that I got to root for him every game for years. And that is what it's like to see a role model. And I think back, or not even back, I think presently to the Mavericks fans who invested memories and emotions and money in jerseys and gear and support and put their fantasies in the hands of a player who wanted to be there. And a decision was made by someone else. And the thing about new ownerships, or rather, I mean, new ownerships to this degree, but even new front offices, a lot of times people will call for change. And the reason they call for change is because something isn't working. And it's fine if something isn't working. But when you see a new executive take over, so many times it comes down to ego. And sometimes ego is healthy, right? You can have a healthy ego, but these executives want their fingerprints. They want to make their mark. They don't want to live the legacy of their predecessors, even if it's working. They don't want to live in that shadow. Ask Mike Dunleavy Jr. right now. Does he really want to be the guy who took over for Bob Myers, who then couldn't do anything and is riding on his coattails? No. He wants to do something significant. He wants to make his impact felt. And Nico Harrison clearly decided to make his impact be felt. He established a great team around a player worth building around 11 times out of 10. And he moved that player. And he moved that player for good assets, good talent. But at what point, what is it worth? If you're a Mavericks fan and somehow this team wins an NBA championship, is it worth it? To some, sure, it will be. To others, probably not. To the fans that are canceling their season tickets, I understand it. If it's a business, it's a business. But for those who put so much of their being into a sport that is a business, but at the end of the day is also a form of enjoyment, and to lose that feeling, I feel terrible for them. They were robbed of years of a franchise player. It's a shame, but it's a business. And that's where we see these other moves come in. We see teams that recognize, hey, we're worried about the second apron down the line. We got to make the right moves. Hey, we're hard capped at the first apron. What are we going to do? How are we going to get this balancing act? And at the end of the day, like I said, there shouldn't be a cost-cutting move involved with a top 5 player in the NBA. Just shouldn't be. There's no situation in which that should be the case for that return. But it's a business. So, with that being said, the Knicks are certainly in business. As mentioned, they had a lot of trades that they did, so probably not a whole lot today. As recently, Ian Begley mentioning that sounds like Jericho Sims would be the likely candidate to be moved, less so on the Mitchell Robinson front. Less than 20 hours, fewer than 20 hours. See what it is. So that's my big one thing. We've got Kev on the ones and twos today helping me out. So thank you in advance, Kev. And if we've got questions, I'm happy to take them.
All right, I'm gonna probably try to put this together, focusing on different topics at a time,
Let's do
because
it.
then the questions are going to be too similar. So we're going to start out with buyout market comments.
Okay. Buyout market comments. Marcus Miller. Buyout market seems likely to be. Salary expend Sims and see if you can snag someone or bring up TJ Warren or Okiki. So let's talk about the buyout market. We've mentioned this a little before. Buyout market is usually pretty weak in the sense of if you're expecting a lot from a player on the buyout market, probably mistake number one. It's if these players were truly that valuable, other teams would find value in them. That's not to say that the Knicks can't sign someone that can add depth, right? But are we expecting those players to perhaps push the Knicks and be like found money? Probably not. They might have a few good games every now and then, but how many opportunities will they get in order to showcase why they were deserving and perhaps why they probably shouldn't have been bought out in the first place? But the way that the Knicks can offer, and this is from Jordan Bubb as well. So, who do you think the Knicks get in buyout market with restrictions that are on them because of them being first apron? They're not a first apron hard cap, to be clear. They're a second apron hard cap. As things stand right now, if the Knicks wanted to sign a player to a contract for that 15th spot, they legally could not. The prorated minimum is too large compared to the salary that they have here. The Knicks are $535,301 underneath the second apron. And if you look at what the minimum salary is today for a team, it would be $815,812. That's more than what the Knicks can allow. So not something they could do with everything as a fixed cost. They'd have to wait until March 1st because on March 1st, that is the date where it's $527,878 to sign a veteran who has had 2 years or more of experience. Would leave the Knicks with a little under $8,000 in space, and that would be that. Now, things change if the Knicks move off of other salary. So if the Knicks were to move Jericho Sims, and if they were to take no money back, what does that mean? Well, first off, if we remove Jericho's salary entirely, then the Knicks have $2,627,645. They would also have 13 players under contract. You need 14. If you're under 14, you can be at 14 days at a time. Underneath that, you've got a little bit of wiggle room. So if the Knicks were to do that, they could. They could wait 14 days, which would make a lot of sense. Why would it make a lot of sense? Well, if you look at the Knicks schedule over the next, 15 days, they've got a game against the Celtics on February 8th, game against the Pacers on February 11th, game against the Hawks on February 12th, and then a game against the Bulls on February 20th. With the All-Star break, that would be time that normally would go towards games. But in this case, doesn't have to. In this case, they can afford to wait, but then they would have to sign someone on February 20th. Now, it doesn't mean that they need to sign a player to an end of season contract. They could buy their time. They could sign a 10-day contract or a player to a 10-day contract, and it's the same cap hit over that period of time, but then you're left with, a portion smaller than what you would have had before because you have to subtract that 10-day amount. So the Knicks could go into February 20th with a roster spot and the prorated minimum on that date. If we can get rid of the ad that Salary Swish, which is a great tool to use, has. But if they were to sign someone on February 20th, it seems that it would be $635,000 some odd dollars, which if we did that, let's say it would be around $2 million in change that the Knicks have. There's also another way that the Knicks go about this, which is the Knicks could monitor the buyout market and they could move Jericho Sims' salary off the books. As mentioned, they would have, if they did that, $2,627,645. So what's the one competitive advantage that the Knicks could have over other teams? The Knicks have not used their taxpayer mid-level exception. Taxpayer mid-level exception, the full amount is north of $5 million. So they can't offer that. But consider this. If you are a player on the buyout market and you're looking at a couple different options, behind door number one, hey, we can give you the prorated amount. It's $600 some odd thousand dollars, and you'd be here on our team. Or door number two, hey, how'd you like to join the Knicks? We can use a portion of our taxpayer mid-level exception to sign you. So you'd be making about $2 million more just to sign in New York and have a role on a contending team. And I would have to think that the mix of winning and money would have the Knicks be towards the front of the buyout of the line for the buyout market. Worth mentioning, are there players worth doing that? That's what we will see as we lead up to the next few weeks. With that in mind as well, do the Knicks want to spend that whole $2.6 million on a 14th player, or do they want to spend a portion of it on a player and then leave room for a 15th man? And they could either sign that 15th man to a contract for the whole season, or they could cycle it and grease palms, as we've talked through, with a player or with multiple players to get them paid, collect their free agent non-bird right status, and always sign and trade them in the offseason. So there are different directions the Knicks could go when it comes to the buyout market. Jericho Sims being traded for no money coming back makes the scenarios of what the Knicks could do greater than, say, trading him for Yabusele or another veteran who would be earning around that amount. So that's what the buyout market would look like for the Knicks.
Speaking of Yabusele,
Yes, sir. Kevin Danishevsky. Thank you, Kevin, for the super chat. Yabu would be really nice. I'd even attach Washington first. I would not. I mean, my goodness, Kevin, first, I mean, that's 2 high second round picks for a player who, if everyone's healthy, is averaging how many minutes per game in the playoffs, right? Because is the only goal here to get the Knicks from where they're at right now to the playoffs? It's not. It's how do you make the best team possible in the playoffs? And I really do not believe that with a healthy Knicks squad, I understand the insurance, but that is a price to pay that is far too much to my liking to get someone who I can't imagine would see more than 8 to 10, maybe 12 minutes come playoff time. Like it's that, and is a free agent at the end of the year. So you're right. Yabu would be really nice. But perhaps Yabu Dabu don't trade that Washington first round pick because, I mean, like I thought it was probably too much. Not even probably. I thought it was too much in a Jonas Valanciunas trade. RIP. It's fine. But like the idea of giving up that type of asset for Valanciunas, I thought was rich. So to give it for a player like Yabusele, I'm definitely out on that one. I'd be pretty frustrated on that. But I appreciate super chat contribution, Kevin. Matthew Stein, Sims and Tadier for Yabusele. Same thing. Sure, Tadier is not going to be seeing time in the playoffs, but if he's a long-term play, that means that you are giving up what? Player who was taken 25th overall, 3 extra years of team control for 20 some odd games, 30 some odd games of Yabusele, and then he's not playing much in the playoffs, assuming health for other players. And again, I understand you're doing this because you want the depth, but to me, this hurts your ceiling down the line. Like, this is not the caliber of player or a player under contract that I'd be comfortable moving that Wizards first or Dadier for. So that would be a no for me. JG, no thanks to Yabusele. Need a wing. Maybe. Here's the other thing. With Precious Achiuwa, the way that he has been playing has been outstanding. He's really becoming one of those guys where I thought, Knicks have 6 players I trust in the come playoff time. how he's trending, I'm starting to believe. I'm starting to believe that he could see significant time in the playoffs, especially depending on the health of Mitchell Robinson. Like, he's gotten me to that point. And so, yeah, maybe the Knicks do need a wing, but again, playoffs. We already know what Tom Thibodeau was capable of the regular season. In the playoffs, he's going to rely even more heavily on the players that got him there. So if you're looking for a wing, that's great, but perhaps it doesn't need to be using Sims. If you could find the right player, sure. But then there's the other thought of, do we think Mikal Bridges is going to average under 40 minutes per game when it really matters? Do we think Josh Hart is going to average under 40 minutes per game? Do we think OG Anunoby is going to average fewer than 36 minutes per game? Like, as far as I'm concerned, this is their team. This is what they're going to do. And you can get some benefit, hopefully, from a healthy Mitchell Robinson, assuming he remains. But this is what they're at. This is where they're at. And I just don't think that there are a ton of players. If you're just getting a wing, also, I know this isn't necessarily the suggestion, JD, but let's just talk it through. You're getting a wing. Okay, well, what type of wing is it? Is it a wing who benefits your team, or someone who merely just slots in as a wing? Because if they're slotting in as a wing and they don't fit exactly what you're looking for, then it's a problem. And if they do fit exactly what you're looking for, great, but what does it cost in order to give up? And then a wing who's really good, or at least good enough, is going to create a bidding war, even a minor one, to do more for that. Like that, more of what they're going to do matters than to other teams. So in theory, that would be great. In reality, I just would be surprised. And the Knicks turned a late second round pick, I believe is the 58th pick overall, into Jericho Sims. And now the goal is to move Jericho Sims for another asset. It's a very minor net positive if they get a better second round pick than what they had. I'd say that was a good ROI. But if they can sign a player who can give you the same value that trading Sims for said player would be, and you get a second round pick out of it, that feels like having your cake and eating it too.
All right, we're gonna end the Yabusele portion of this live stream. I want to double back to another buyout market question or comment. Here we go from JG again.
JG, we got Shake Milton the buyout market last season. Didn't do ish besides using his salary in the Mikal Bridges trade. Exactly. And when you look at the buyout market, now it's even tougher because the Knicks can't sign a player earning more than $12.8 million. So the options are pretty slim. So how many of the players who are earning below $12.8 million are worth acquiring on the buyout market and fit exactly what the Knicks need? It's not easy at all. Like, I even started to compile a spreadsheet or a presentation of the names of players who were bought out in the last few years and what it would look like if you filtered out all of the players making above the mid-level exception respective to that year. And it was bleak. These were names that if you like them, it's because you're remembering the best years of their careers. And those years are likely behind them because they're pretty much in their early to mid 30s. And the drop off, usually when you get to around 30 years old, could be significant. And I mean, it depends on the player, of course. And I say that as someone who in human years is approaching 30 years old. So for humans, we're doing great. But for NBA players, it's a little different, of course. But the way that you go about it with the buyout market, I just, if you get any positive traction on the court, it's a bonus. It's not the expectation. It's great if you get it. But the likelihood of it is a lot smaller than people think because it's, hey, you're just signing someone with an exception, right? You're just signing someone to a minimum contract. But it's more than that. These players are typically not desirable for reasons, and it's not purely for cash. Now, another name, and perhaps this will come up, Torrey Craig is an interesting option to me. He's older. Again, one of those players where I don't think he'd get significant minutes, but his catch and shoot numbers pretty good. Takes a last I checked, I think he took a serviceable amount of threes per 100. Um, Defensive in theory, but I think his game has dropped off a bit more. Played 9 games this season, so he's not the healthiest, or at least certainly not been playing much. I haven't been following a ton and being completely transparent with that. But that's the type of player where if you're like, yes, Torrey Craig, absolutely, hell yeah. I'm just under the impression that perhaps we're looking more at the best years of Torrey Craig's career and less about what we would expect from said player the course of the season come late February, March, and early April. But JG's right. Ben Tauber, thank you for the Super Chat contribution. Regarding next season, looks like Knicks only have $9 million in space below the second apron without Payne, Precious, Shamet, Sims. How does New York get depth while staying below the second apron? That's a good question. One that I have been very curious about because there are limited avenues for what the Knicks can do the following year. If they do exactly as Ben's saying, yes, it would be $8,968,038. But who's counting? To sign those players or to sign other players. And if you want to stay below the second apron, which I believe the Knicks will do, each salary chips away at it a little bit more. So it's why, based on how he's playing, it does make sense to retain someone like Precious Achiuwa because bringing Precious Achiuwa back does not hard cap you. There's nothing that has to happen. You could pay him $8 million. You're not hard capped because he's your own player. You have his bird rights. You acquired them in the trade when you got him and OG Anunoby. So I would gather the Knicks make some fungible pieces, but I continue being the person who points at Mitchell Robinson and says that is a player I don't see here long term. And every year, every transaction cycle, I'm not correct. I think there will be a time in which I am, and that's fine because I've missed the mark on every single one, and patience is a virtue. But especially when, not to say that Ariel Hukporti is better than Mitchell Robinson when healthy. That is not what I'm saying. With that said, last night's game was a good example where the Knicks have tremendous depth at the 5. And to Ben's point, there are only so many players. How are they going to get depth? And if you can get 15 to 18 minutes a night, probably closer to 12 to 15 from Hukporti, and you have Precious Achiuwa playing well with Karl Anthony Towns. And oh, by the way, you have Karl Anthony Towns. You have a logjam. And so it's harder to sign and trade. It's doable, but signing and trading Precious Achiuwa, because then you have to hard cap another team at the first apron, is probably more difficult than moving a player like Mitchell Robinson. So Knicks could do that. They could keep Mitchell Robinson. They could bring back Precious Achiuwa. It just means they cannot use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, really, because then it would hard cap them. It would physically hard cap them. And as mentioned last time on the last episode of C.R.E.A.M, you can't, with everything pretty much staying the same and meeting the minimum roster requirements, you cannot have Mitchell Robinson, Precious Achiuwa, and bring someone in on that taxpayer mid-level exception. Something has to give. So that's where I think spreading the wealth around using Mitch's salary makes more sense than it could be using Precious' salary. You're guaranteed to hard cap the team that receives Precious Achiuwa at the first apron because he would be signed and traded there. You are not guaranteed to hard cap a team at the first apron by trading away Mitchell Robinson. You likely are, but it's not definite, especially because the way that it could work is a 3-team deal where another team is the one that gets hard capped and is fine with it. So there will be tough decisions to be made as the Knicks keep their team together with the finances. We're already seeing teams making more drastic cuts because of that threshold. I fully anticipate the Knicks will do it. But the one other thing that I want to mention is and Ben brings this up with the second apron. I've been operating under the assumption, hey, Knicks are under the second apron next year, and the year after that, they're going to go above the second apron. And I was talking with Chris Persianen about this, and he made a great point, which is that if anything, the Knicks have shown that they're flexible. There is no one plan to get to where they want. There are moving pieces, moving parts, and players that appeal to them in different facets. Now, with that in mind, I think that it's a great point and one where it's gotten me to reconsider, you know what? Maybe the only sure thing, at least for me, should be second apron. They're not going above it next year, but they're flexible and open the year after that. And maybe they don't, because if they wanted to make a big move in 2026, right? Summer 2026, after the 2026 draft, they unlock their 2033 pick. If a star became available and the Knicks wanted to use that pick and they wanted to get some other talent, there's a very good chance that in order to make the math work, where they have more money going out than coming in, they've got to aggregate salary. And if they aggregate salary, guess what? You're hard capping yourself at the second apron the next year. So it could very easily be that the Knicks do not go above the second apron in the 26-27 season, and that they do it the year after, or that they don't do it at all. But it's such a restrictive thing that I wouldn't anticipate it even before then. That's the one thing I feel the most confident about. But Ben, you bring up a great point. Tough decisions will have to be made. There's not a whole lot of room, and it's working backwards as opposed to working forwards when you have the second apron. So thank you for that super chat contribution. Appreciate the question. Anthony Sixto, thank you for the super chat contribution. Down the road, but what are your thoughts on the Bridges extension this summer / next year? Is second apron inevitable? I imagine the price tag goes up for him. Just mentioned the second apron portion of that. What I will say about the Bridges extension, it's hard for us to count players' money. I'm inclined to think when Jalen Brunson takes a pay cut, doesn't set a tone for everyone, because we saw other players get theirs. We saw Isaiah Hartenstein get paid. We saw OG Anunoby get paid. We're going to keep seeing players make money no matter what. That's a different story. But I would gather, if you're Mikal Bridges and the Knicks say to you, this is where we're at. We've got a team that is perfectly balanced with the second apron, but it does rely on you taking an extension. Do you want the extension? And I would gather, if Mikal Bridges is vehemently against it, that the Knicks then say, okay, we've got to consider. We've got to consider other options. Now, I would also assume that the reason that Mikal Bridges didn't lock into an extension before the season is because he stands to earn more money. The extension after the season would be a compromise. It would be, hey, you're paying me more than I would have gotten at the beginning of if I had signed before the season, but I'm getting paid less in order to have a contending team with my close friends from college. Oh, and by the way, we're really good. So that is, of course, the belief that I hold, which I have no knowledge about, but would gather that's at least an option. But if it's not an option, if it's just not been done whatsoever, and the contract's drawn up, it's just waiting to be signed, wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of thing, then the Knicks have to consider something, because they can't run the risk of losing said player. And, these players usually get locked up anyway. The Knicks also can't, because I would gather this will come up, can't the Knicks renegotiate his contract and then sign him to a bigger deal? They cannot. They don't have cap space that year to do that. So they can't renegotiate his deal. It's just not possible. So I gather he extends off of that. Everyone's happy. The Knicks present him with a plan of, by doing this, you free us up to do all of this. Works like a charm. Hopefully everyone's happy. I'm also at the point, and we can move on to the next question, but I'm also at the point that with the NBA, just expect the unexpected. Luka Doncic was traded this past week. Players go to different places for different reasons. We have no idea what they want.
All right, we're going to go back to the super chats, but first I want to talk about some players.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right. Prometheus, would you do Jericho Sims for Jaden Hardy? I'm actually, let me take a quick look at Jaden Hardy's salary because it doesn't pass the smell test. And it should, though. He signed for $6 million. That's right. So he's under contract this year for cheaper. So he does make less. So you could make that work. So yes, Prometheus, good work by you. But in terms of that extra $6 million, I don't know what Jaden Hardy does that has justified paying your backup guard $6 million when you have Tyler Kolek and you could still bring back Cameron Payne. I get the continuous soup thought process behind it of turning that $6 million into something. But to me, it feels like it just doesn't fit. It doesn't quite work in my mind as someone that you can easily move. And I like the creativity of it. I'm going into, and we'll figure out what this summer looks like this summer, but the shortest point between A and B is usually a straight line. And so, yeah, the Knicks could bring in someone and use their salaried, and it would work out fine, but it's the Mitchell Robinson of it all. It's Precious Achiuwa of it all. It's what are you doing with other salary that you have? If you acquire anyone else, which although could be doubtful, it's do you sign that buyout player to a 2-year deal where the second year is a team option? And then you're able to use that instead. Probably not. More just thinking of what you could do, but I doubt that would be the case. So to me, Jaden Hardy, I get the mindset, Prometheus, where you're going. Uh, I don't think he really moves the needle, and then he hurts some of what you're able to do or not do come next season with the second apron being as tight to where the Knicks finances are. JD, Alec Burks. Again, just because the math works doesn't mean it'll happen. As I've said, I don't think that the Heat and the Knicks will make a trade with each other. I feel like Pat Riley's still going to stand pretty tall against that. But Cameron Payne's doing his thing. Deuce McBride seeing time. Yeah, could you put Alec Burks with them? Sure. I mean, he's not really much of a driver. Neither is Cameron Payne, to be clear. But you know, it'd probably have to be a 3-team deal because what are the Heat getting back? They don't necessarily want Jericho Sims. I think that ship has sailed, but it would be very funny to acquire Alec Burks for a third time. Exploding Daisies. Oops. I guess we'll. Anthony Sixto. Did he talk about Sims for Javonte Green? I have in the past. Again, Javonte Green to me feels like the type of player where you look at his 3-point percentage and you say, "Great, that's it. That's all I need to see." But it's the quality of the threes, how many he's taking, what he does. I wouldn't go crazy over it. Like I wouldn't be thrilled about it. I also wouldn't be, I can't believe the Knicks did this. I would rather see the Knicks trade Sims for a second round pick and use a player in the buyout market than get Javonte Green, because I don't think that the difference between Javonte Green mattering to the Knicks team and the buyout player, given everything we've talked about with the buyout player, the ideal one at least, is going to do that much of a difference. Like I just think that they're so. If you're watching this, right, it's here's where the buyout player is. Here's Javonte Green. They're very close to each other, and then here's the talent that's actually going to see time in the playoffs. And again, if you're saying regular season, I'm just talking about regular season. That's fine. I would just rather have a future asset and use money to sign a player than get a player who is marginally better than said player and not get a second round pick. So it's just not really of interest to me. I wouldn't absolutely hate it. I'd just be like, all right, I guess fine. It just doesn't feel like it checks the boxes for how you help yourself short term and long term. Anthony Sixto, appreciate the. I think this one was already read. This was the Mikal Bridges one. Let's see. Dylan Courier, appreciate your contributions. What's the stunner Nick trade you think about? It's a good question, Dylan. The stunner Nick trade. I'd say probably moving Pacome would be the stunner, which I know seems kind of silly. Maybe Tyler Kolek, just because these are players who were drafted just now. And mind you, the Bucks today traded Chris Middleton and their first round pick this past year to get something in Kyle Kuzma. Uh, Curious how that one shakes out. Pretty crazy that that's where Chris Middleton's value lies. But why did they attach that player? Well, they were taking a large salary and they got a large salary back. If the Knicks are going to do something like that, who's it going to be? It's not Cat, it's not OG, it's not Brunson, it's not Bridges, it's not Hart. So they could do it with Mitchell Robinson and attach Pacome Dadier or Tyler Kolek. But we've gone through the list of players and none of them really move me in a significant way. So that's the one where I'd be pretty surprised. Same with Precious Achiuwa. We're talking about 6 million plus 2, give or take a couple $100,000. I don't think there are any needle movers earning around $8 million or below. So I think any of the young guys who are out of the rotation being moved, that would probably be the stunner for me, because I'm saying this as someone who just fully believes the starting 5 and Deuce are going nowhere. And Precious has, in my opinion, played his way into staying through the season at the very least. So who else is there salary-wise in this new CBA that gets you to that point? So that's probably my stunner, Dylan, but I like that question a lot. Thank you. Sean with a W. Appreciate your contribution here, buddy. You were in college when Jeter retired. Jesus fucking Christ, I'm old. Honestly, Sean, yeah, you are. I mean, it's cool. Again, like I mentioned, I'm going through my own thing and it's fine. But yeah, yeah. You're not washed, but you're definitely getting up there. But aren't we all? Chris Persianen. Hey, Chris. Oh, KFS in full squad out. If you had to guess the teams who want Sims. So believe it was reported that, what was it? You had the Lakers. The Lakers are tricky to match salary with. You need a third team because the Knicks can't get Sims for even Bronny. Not that that would happen. And then they can't take back Cam Reddish, not that they initially would, or Christian Wood. They really just salary-wise, it'd be more money in or out. The Clippers, I feel like that itch has been scratched because they have Eubanks now. I see with the Mavs, there was certainly the idea of them getting a center. I have to imagine that ship has sailed. But it's funny that Chris brings that up because I've been wondering who is the Jericho Sims team, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly who or what it is that gets it done. You don't have to find a team that needs a roster spot, but it's easier to do. But then if there's a third team involved, you could do it that way. There are only so many teams that can take on a player that works for them. The one thing that I'm thinking, I need to, this is very much off the cuff. I want to be absolutely clear about that because bear with me as I think this through. Okay, so that doesn't work. I was thinking, a team like the Bucks that doesn't really have a great backup center. They've got Bobby Porter, so I think they might move some pieces around there. But I'm thinking, okay, well, if a team doesn't absorb Sims because he's a minimum salary, could they use a new traded player exception to take his money in? But then who are they sending out and what are they doing? So if you look at a team like the Bucks, just as an example, they do have 15 players, which is a tougher thing to do. I mean, it's really a matter of how badly do they want someone like Sims? Like Taurean Prince would make sense. I don't think they're going to move Taurean Prince, at least not for Sims. I don't think that would resonate. I don't think that they're going to move Gary Trent Jr. He's been seeing consistent time. So, can they move? Well, they can't really move Patrick Baldwin Jr., certainly not to the Knicks. It's trickier for them. They're the salaries are tough. So if I had to guess about teams that need a backup center, the Kings are off the board because they just got Valanciunas. Um, it doesn't have to. So if you're a bad team, you're probably not going to want Jericho Sims because now, granted, could you acquire him to have your bird rights or have his bird rights this offseason? You could. But also, let's take a step back. Is a team really going to look at Jericho Sims, a team that could use a portion of the taxpayer mid-level or the non-taxpayer mid-level to sign him if they really needed to? Like, I don't think getting his bird rights is that crucial. With that said, the market is fairly dry. He's an unrestricted free agent. It might benefit them to do that. I just don't think it's the exact thing that benefits them the most. In terms of centers, though, and teams that have the necessary cash to get it done, uh, just looking at this list, I mean, the Pacers are out. They moved Thomas. They got Thomas Bryant. I still don't really see why the Pelicans do it, especially with their tax situation finally being better. Uh, you know, could it be a team like the Grizzlies? Gosh, at this point, I'm just kind of again off the cuff. I don't think so. They've got enough salary here that works for them. So I just feel like it's going to be a random team because it's the teams that were rumored, unless it's somehow the Bucks. None of them really make sense anymore. The reporting that we have feels stale just based on the moving pieces and the salary behind it. So yeah, the other thing too, just to mention, teams that have roster spaces. This is going to be important because if we're talking about moving Jericho Sims out for no money back, it means that a team has to waive a player or that they have to already have a roster spot free and can afford to sign that player because of any hard cap issues. And right now, there are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 teams right now, as things stand, that have an open roster spot. But of those 12 teams, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, one of them being the Knicks, are above the first apron. A fifth is above the first apron in the Heat. The Warriors are $1.3 million away from being from the first apron. So that would be tricky for them. The Mavs are settled. The Cavs are probably dealing with their own luxury tax situation because they're very close to being below it. So I'd gather they're not the team. Also, do you really want to strengthen the Cavs? Probably don't. The Pelicans just got out from their luxury tax mess. The Sixers have Drummond, so I don't think that they're going to do anything. The Kings just did their thing. Could be the Spurs. Yeah, I mean, let's take a look at the Spurs cap sheet just while we're here and see what they could do. There's some restructuring, I'm sure. I mean, keep in mind the Spurs, they've got very few centers, although shout out my good friend Sandro Mamakashvili from who's a chill guy I met in Summer League. Want the best, another but the best for my buddy Sandro. But I don't think he's going to see plenty of time. I'll be honest, I always mess up if it's Basie or Bassey. He's probably not seeing a lot of time. I'm going to go with I'm going to say the Spurs. That's my guess, Chris. I've dug deep enough where I think they do it. They basically can get it done. They should. I'm just looking here in terms of what their requirements are. I mean, they're a first apron hard cap team, but they're $13.7 million away. So that's fine. They used much of the room exception on Jalen McDaniels to take on his salary. But I think that they should still, they have $3.241 million remaining. So if I were the Knicks, I'd call up the Spurs. And then let's see, what do the Spurs have in terms of second round draft pick compensation? Well, they have their own 2025 pick. Then they've got a whole bunch of jumbled mess in 2026 and 2027. Another thought, let's say they've got the Jazz pick in 2026, the second round pick. If you're the Knicks, do you say, hey, San Antonio, we'll give you Sims and one or two of our lesser seconds. And in return, you can give us the Utah second, because then if you're the Knicks, you are setting yourself up nicely where you've got the Wizards second round pick and the Jazz second round pick. Then in 2026, you might be able to either use those as trade chips or move up in the draft. But the Spurs have a lot of first round picks. Great job by them with the Fox trade, keeping so many of their best pieces in San Antonio. I'm going to go with the Spurs. They've got a plethora of assets, and they just traded away Zach Collins, and they could use some rebounding help and a little bit of rim protection. So thanks, Chris. San Antonio it is. JM, appreciate super chat contribution. Jay, Mitch to Phoenix, Grayson Allen to the Knicks, Sims to a third team to make the math work. Allen is CAA and under team control. Fred Katz said Richard's not great so far in Phoenix. I mean, let's take a step back. If you are the Suns, now what are you doing with Yusuf Nurkic? Because you have Richards, who's still going to see plenty of time. You've got Plumlee, who's probably seeing time still. Of course, if you had Mitchell Robinson, you would play Plumlee less. But then it's just, there's so many centers. And then it hurts them there. I like that level of creativity. And I understand the Allen to CAA thing. Connections are no denying that. I feel like we're past the point on CAA where it just doesn't really impact it. Like, it helps, but the big thing with CAA was primarily getting stars in the door. Knicks have that right now. So to me, CAA is kind of just, they are merely an agency where the Knicks have close ties, but it doesn't have to be look at where Leon Rose used to work kind of feeling. So I don't love this for Phoenix. And I think the Knicks, they get a very good shooter, but his defense is poor enough where I don't think he really helps the Knicks when it matters most. Like, if he gets targeted a lot, and I believe he probably would be come playoff time, like, again, what are you moving him for? It doesn't. I like it less for Phoenix than I do for the Knicks. And then when we look at Grayson Allen's contract, I mean, here's the other advantage. Mitchell Robinson, his salary descends. Grayson Allen, his salary ascends. He is making $15.6 million this year. He's making 16.9 next year. He's making 18.1 the year after that. And then, geez, talking about him holding the Suns for ransom. He has a $19.4 million player option at the age of 32. Yeesh. Yeah, I'm going to pass on the Grayson Allen prospect, but I like that creativity. For me, I wouldn't be in favor of it, though. But thanks for the question.
But speaking of CAA,
Sean with a W. Thank you again. How real is CAA client and cat BFF D'Lo to New York in 26? What's his market this summer? I mean, it has to be low. I feel like he's running out of chances, and these guys have friends all around the league. I'm having trouble imagining Tibbs seeing D'Angelo Russell and being like, that's the guy that I want on my team. That's who I need. Unless he's embracing the campaign role. I don't know. I'd be surprised. I think he's always been one of those guys where it's like, oh, he'd be great in a place like Orlando. And I don't know if he really would. I feel like D'Lo, he's running out of chances, but maybe he's still a sneaky taxpayer mid-level guy. And if you're paying the taxpayer mid-level and you're the Knicks for D'Angelo Russell, I think you've already committed poorly to the value that he brings. Like, in my mind, he's purely a veteran minimum player. Nothing more for the Knicks. That's how I view it. Other teams, I think he'd have more value as earning more than the minimum, but this doesn't do it for me. Thanks, Sean. The Plaid Unicorn, appreciate your super chat contribution. Late to the show, so apologies if covered, but Deuce is due for an extension in December. What do you see his number being? I don't see Deuce's number being anywhere near enough for an extension. So Deuce would be eligible for a 140% raise. And I mean, it's not a lot. We're talking like a little over $5 million. And we know he's going to make it. So Deuce to me is probably never going to sign an extension because he's simply too good. He'll hit unrestricted free agency. Now, he hits unrestricted free agency. What happens? People are instantly going to flash back to Isaiah Hartenstein. Oh my God, it's a different situation because the Knicks hold Deuce McBride's bird rights. They did not hold Isaiah Hartenstein's bird rights. They had his early bird rights. So with Deuce, the Knicks could theoretically, right? Not suggesting, just saying, theoretically, could offer him 30% of the salary cap. They won't do that. It's not something. Actually, come to think of it, might be 25%. I'm trying to think of how many years of credit of eligibility he will have had. Let's see, it's a 3-year contract. I think it's actually 3 years and then 3 years. So it's actually a 25% max, which again, he's not going to get. He's not going to get a 25% max contract. But it goes to show he could earn up to that, which means he's in line for a healthy payday. And it's kind of too far right now for the Knicks to be like, we'll keep him or we won't. It's not quite that binary. There's time. But I don't want to say it's 100% guaranteed that he's still here because when you have so much money allocated to other players, great role player, but then also are you drafting and developing other talent? Like, hate to say it here, but let's say the Knicks did that type of move, or actually forget about that move, the Jericho Sims trade just for a moment. Let's say the Knicks actually kept the Wizards pick and then they drafted a player in 2026 who is similar, but not Deuce McBride, but similar to him. And then they developed him slowly. And then when they needed someone to fit in for the Deuce McBride minutes, they have someone who's slightly worse, but then they use Deuce McBride in a trade that helps their ceiling. Like that is the mindset that you would have to have down the line. It will be a little bit more apparent potentially as we hit probably next year's draft, the 2026 draft. But until then, I just don't think that there will be any movement whatsoever on Deuce. He's on too good of a deal. The Knicks got a great deal the first time, and then they got an even better extension. They're not going to be as lucky the third time around, but appreciate that, Plaid Unicorn. It's definitely worth at least acknowledging. Kevin Danishevsky. Thank you, Kevin. If Mitch comes back, anxious that Tibbs plays him with Precious Achiuwa. Probably will. Probably will. I mean, I believe we saw Precious Achiuwa in Huck 40 minutes very briefly last night. So it's a possibility if you want to go large. Precious's spacing is not great, although he's hitting some corner threes. Hit his first right corner three last night, which was pretty funny. So I mean, you probably should be anxious, but it probably is going to happen if assuming both are healthy and available. I wouldn't imagine it won't based on the Knicks and size and fit. Like maybe they find a way to scheme around it, but then how often is Cat playing with Mitch? And then what does that do to Cat? It puts him back really at the 4, which I don't think the Knicks want to do. I think they want to maximize him as a 5, the best that they can. But again, Kevin, we can only control what we can control. So don't be anxious about things that haven't even happened yet. I know that's literally what anxiety is, but there's so many better things to focus on. Thank you, Kevin. Jason M. Thoughts on the new CBA? It's forcing teams to make tough decisions and rewarding smart front offices. Here's my thought on the CBA. If you're an NBA team, don't be stupid. Don't make bad decisions. Yeah, it's tough, but it's not like every team isn't dealing with the same level of an issue. They're all dealing with the same rules. Like, we as a society abide by the same rules, uh, at least in theory. In reality, maybe not so much. But in theory, we're all bound by the law, and NBA teams are no different. So if you're going to make a move, make the right move. And if you're going to make a wrong move, or if you wound up making a move that didn't turn out in your favor, cut bait where you have to, right? Like, the thing that I really appreciate about the Knicks front office, yes, they're very talented. They do, they pull out things that just loopholes of the CBA. They're great at that. But they also look at their mistakes and they just cut bait where they can. Didn't work? Let's find a solution that does. Like, does it suck? Yeah, but you know what sucks even more is when it hangs over you and creates more chaos. And you have these thorns in your side that prevent you, because the margin of error is so small. It's so slim. So if something's not working for you, make a move. That's really it. So if that's the case, then go for it. And that's what I love about what they've done. So yeah, this new CBA, it's really tough. But also, the CBA isn't designed for fans, it's designed for teams. So if you can't do your job, then it's tough. That's all I'll say. Andrew P, thanks for the super chat contribution. For fun, what's the path to acquire Kevin Durant? Okay, well, the path is a multi-team deal. It's going to take more than two, that's for sure. The Knicks and the Suns cannot take back more salary than they send out. So that's a bit of a problem. The Suns also can't aggregate. So I actually haven't spent a ton of time, Andrew, looking at how to do this, because in my mind, it's just not. The juice isn't worth the squeeze for 36-year-old Kevin Durant. The Knicks have a long runway, at least they should, of players if they wanted to make a seismic change. I'm not even against that, but probably shouldn't be for Kevin Durant, with all due respect to Kevin Durant. I think he just works better elsewhere. So he's $51.1 million. Let's face it, at least I'm going to go by this. The path does not include Karl Anthony Towns or Jalen Brunson. So what does that mean? It includes OG Anunoby or Mikal Bridges. Well, it's harder to do with Mikal Bridges because his salary is lower. It's $23.3 million. So we'd have to find, $28 million just to get over the hump. So in this case, would have to be OG Anunoby. And also, just again, I think the idea of moving Karl Anthony Towns for Kevin Durant, when I can't stomach it. So my podcast, my decision. Next, we have to make up the difference here. Again, this is not even finding a third team yet. This is just talking about salary. For the math to work, if you moved Mitchell Robinson, then you get to 50.9. So now you're like $200,000 away from the math working from the Knicks side, which means that you could really move anyone not named Landry Shamet because he can't be traded. So let's say you moved Dadier. Like, yeah, you could do it. Okay. So then you have to add your third team into the mix, because if we didn't have a third team, the Suns would be in trouble. So let's call up, I don't know, let's call up Detroit, because they're a team that at least had cap space. I'm trying to remember if they do. Dadier, let's have him go to the Pistons. It works. It's doable. That's the one trade where you'd have, like, the one scenario where the math would just barely make it in order to do that. Now, again, am I suggesting the Knicks should do Kevin Durant, or should get Kevin Durant using those three players moving out? I'm not. I also don't think the Pistons could even absorb Pacome Dadier. They'd have to waive a player in order to make that happen. So is it financially possible? It is. It's feasible. Should it happen? No. But I think this is also a good example. Whether you want the Knicks to do this or not, this is an example that moving forward, the Knicks very likely do have the numbers to get another star into the door, but it would more than likely have to cost OG Anunoby. So thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the fun because now I get to see it. Frank Sound, appreciate the Euros coming my way. Thank you. It's OG and Nick when Mikal becomes a free agent. Thanks. So yeah, that's similar to what we were just discussing. Of is OG and Nick when Mikal becomes a free agent? Assuming Mikal Bridges locks into the extension, it doesn't have one impact or the other. But if Mikal does sign the extension, and you're trying to make math work, then it likely means that if you had to send a player out, it still goes back to OG. So he's at the top of the list. Just because that's how the numbers would shake out. If you want to keep your stars and Mikal Bridges doesn't move and you want to then add another star, you're probably not acquiring a young star because those players are at a premium, unless their name is Luka Doncic, I suppose. And in that case, like his salary was so high that you'd have to make the math work anyway. So again, this isn't meant to be some sort of OG Anunoby. He's on the trade block. That's not it at all. But it's more if the Knicks ever want to keep increasing their ceiling and they want to add that type of player, that's where the math is. That's how it could shake out. Thank you, Frank. Mike B. Sales. Apologies if it's a different pronunciation. How does the minimum exception work trade-wise? I always thought you could trade for a minimum player with the minimum exception. Sims counted as a minimum when aggregating earlier. Would he now too? You can aggregate minimum salaries now or past December 15th. Minimum exception works where you can absorb a player making a minimum salary. Yes. However, if you're hard capped at the first apron and you're going to go above it, you can't do that trade. So the Knicks can't use the minimum exception to acquire a player because they would then go above the second apron hard cap, which is a no-no. So some teams can do it and other teams can't. Like a team like the Spurs, they could do it. They could also take him in using the room exception. I don't believe they have a trade player exception based on what we just saw. If for whatever reason they did, they could absorb him that way too. But teams are restricted now with the minimum exception because of where their finances at and because of the hard cap that they would likely have. So it's a good question though, Mike. Triple M. Can the Knicks get Chris Duarte? They would have to sign him once he's cleared waivers, which I assume he will. After that, they could. They'd have to wait until March 1st, unless, of course, they move Jericho Sims, in which case they could sign Duarte sooner than that, as soon as tomorrow, in theory. Well, at least once he passes waivers, which should be tomorrow, I believe. But he's an option. I don't know if he's really going to do a whole lot for the Knicks, but he's young. I mean, he was old for a prospect, but he is still young in the grand scheme of things. Just a question of, is that the direction that the Knicks want to go? I mean, he's really struggled. We know as well that the Knicks had interest, or at least reported interest, in Duarte. But this year, the shot was fine. It's just he played 17 games. It's such a small sample size. Gosh, he's 27 already. Man. The years just add up, don't they, Sean? They really do. But yeah, they could. They could, in theory, get him once he clears waivers. Sorry, Sean. Robert Cross. Robert. It's good to hear from you, Robert. Thank you. Appreciate you joining us today. This is for the legend of Captain Kickball. Know that I will be grinning from ear to ear when Money Mitch is on the roster after the deadline. It's fine, Robert. I'm happy you're happy. I want to support you, and if that means that you're a happy person for another few months, then all the power to you. In the meantime, I'm also very okay with Mitchell Robinson being on the Knicks past this deadline. I know I've talked about him a lot as a moving piece. No deal is better than a bad deal. That's just the crux of it. Knicks, if they don't trade Mitchell Robinson, means they didn't make a bad deal, which is good. But it's great because then, Robert, it means that the months of May and June, although let's face it, really, hopefully for just a week in June, because it means the Knicks will be playing deep into June. I'm just gonna slide into your DMs and tease you mercilessly, and all you will be able to muster are gifs showing your frustration and cursing that I'm taunting you about this, and then that'll bring me joy. So this is a win-win for me, honestly. I appreciate it, Robert. Thank you for fulfilling me with that level of joy. You are not happy that I am happy. Lies. No, Robert, I care about you. I care about your happiness. I could never lie to you. It'd be rude. I don't like lying. I feel like I try to be an honest person where I can be. I would never, Robert. I would never. Kai Tsurumaki. Financially, how can we get back Dante in the offseason? Mitchell Robinson. 3-team deal. At least it would have to be more than 2 teams because unless the Timberwolves can get below the first apron, spoiler, they're not going to. They might be able to get below the second apron, but they're not going below the first apron. Another team would have to take on Mitchell Robinson, and then Dante DiVincenzo would have to be back in New York. So that's essentially, I mean, I don't want to say the only way. There's probably some other shenanigans the Knicks could do, but the cleanest way would be that. It also, if the Knicks did that, they have more money going out than coming in, which means that move would not hard cap them. So if they didn't want to be hard capped, or if they wanted to find ways to do it otherwise, that's certainly something that could be done. So yeah. Kev. Oh, there we are. Ben Kim Gervey. Any rumblings about Dadier's development? Not that I know of. I want to say one thing about development. And the one thing is success is not linear. And I have noticed with how the conversation goes. And I say this again as someone who, I like Tom Thibodeau. I was a cool dude when I saw him in the airport. He was nice. That's also not going to be the reason why I think the Knicks should or shouldn't keep Tom Thibodeau here. But what I will say is I do feel like it's very difficult for Tom Thibodeau when it comes to fans, right? Because let's talk about Dadier's development. Similar to Huck Porty, similar to Kolek, any of these players. Okay. So if these players, let's talk through the scenarios. Players go straight to the NBA, and they get time. They do well. That's great. Awesome. We're happy about it. They don't do well. What does it mean? How does it impact their confidence? Are they able to work through it? How are the Knicks reacting if they're losing minutes? And can they afford to do that? Because in the grand scheme of things, what's the most important thing for the Knicks? It's winning. Long-term development's important. That's great. But okay. So I'm gonna step off of my my soapbox for a moment because Kev has just informed me that Jimmy Butler has been traded to the Golden State Warriors. The Miami Heat are finalizing, this is per Shams, Miami Heat are finalizing a deal to send Jimmy Butler to the Golden State Warriors for Andrew Wiggins, Dennis Schroeder, Kyle Anderson, and a protected first-round pick. Wow. Well, congrats to Dennis Schroeder, who's once again filling up the Shaquille O'Neal, Roy G. Biv jersey scenario. That's pretty cool. Good for him. Man, in terms of this trade, I just feel like the Warriors it feels like they're just basically buying time until Steph retires, and then I don't know what they're doing. I'm not saying they should have blown it up with Steph and moved him, but this doesn't move me. Them as a team, it doesn't do much for me. That's my instant reaction. Like, I understand why the Heat had to get out of this. I think for the Heat, it's a decent enough return, but I just don't love it for the Warriors. They're in this position where it feels like they're in purgatory to me. They had the best years a team could possibly want, and this is what they get. And I don't mean that maliciously. I just mean like it's the price you pay. So I guess that's it. I guess he's going to Golden State. Okay. Back to the soapbox once again, Ben, real quick. Players, they start out from the gate, play well, great. They don't play well, confidence, they're losing minutes, Knicks are losing games. Okay. They go to the G League, they see time there, they're doing well. The competition in the G League is much worse than the NBA. I don't know if some fully understand it's not a gulf, it's an ocean of difference. There are going to be players who excel in the G League and find their footing in the NBA who are undrafted, taken the second round, maybe even taken late first round. There are players who are going to find success. But translating from that level to the NBA level is really hard. And then you see someone like Huck Porty get good minutes, and he's going to have good nights and he's going to have bad nights. And I just feel like oftentimes it feels like the bad nights are, well, he's growing, it's a rookie. And the good nights are, see, this is why he deserves to play. I can't believe that he didn't play earlier. And it also gives off the impression that Huck Porty, again, as an example, that the player that we saw, for example, last night, who added some solid time, that was the same guy earlier in the season. Like, there's growth, there's development. It happens when we aren't looking at it. And I don't mean to be trust blindly with the front office and Tibbs and all of that with these players. It's not what I want to get at. It's primarily just we have to consider that there's more to this than we are operating on. And that when you look at a player like Deuce McBride, who seldom played, I mean, if we look at his stats in terms of what he did in his appearance, played 40 games his rookie year. And that was because the Knicks needed someone to do that. Now they have a much better roster than the 21-22 season where they were a bad team. And then 40 to 64 games, 64 to 68 games. Like the minutes per game, he went from 9.3 minutes per game to 11.9 to 19.5 to 23.3. And that's not even considering where the garbage time minutes are. Because then if we look at garbage time, Clear the Glass has it 10.8 minutes per game his first year, 12.3 after that. Third year took that leap, 20.7 minutes per game, now 22.2 minutes per game. So with all these guys, these young guys, just give it time. That's all it takes. Hopefully it pans out, though. So, Kev, unless we have anything else, I think that's a wrap. Thank you all for tuning in. Really appreciate you taking the time. We already got the Jimmy Butler trade. I would sincerely hope that people can have their nights off and not have to worry about another trade around the corner. Let's save it for the deadline so that we have some content to talk about, please. Please. So that would be great. But appreciate everyone tuning in. Thank you to Kev for the ones and twos. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, leave a 5-star review. We are back, as mentioned, during the trade deadline, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time before the 3 p.m. deadline. We'll be going probably until around 4 p.m. And then Saturday, once again, just want to plug, we are doing a watch party at T-Squared, Be There or BT Squared. That will be against the Celtics. So looking forward to watching that game with a bunch of you. Should be an exciting loss, as is tradition with Knicks Film School watch parties. So with that, thank you as always.
One more.
Yes. Uh-huh. Kevin Danishevsky. All right, Kevin, take us home. The Huck Porty conversation is silly with Tibbs. I've been very worried about his ability to produce optimal spacing in the playoffs. Huck Mitch lineups don't help. I mean, I don't think he's sniffing the playoffs, sniffing the floor come playoff time unless significant injuries. Like, he's someone where you bring him in for regular season minutes when you need to. He's essentially Jericho Sims right now when Jericho was a rookie, and that's totally fine. Come playoff time, I wouldn't even think about him seeing minutes. And if he does, the Knicks are really in trouble. And they've got much bigger problems on their plate. But thank you, Kev. I agree. And with that, thank you all. See you tomorrow.